If you think your thoughts and opinions do not matter, or if you fear taking the next steps towards a better you, or if you allow other people to take free reign of your life, now is the time to put an end to these limiting beliefs. Welcome to Change Your View, a podcast that will help you take back control to have a well-lived life and the conviction that your life is to have meaning. Join Hasina Shahid Jackson in discussions aimed at overcoming the limitations of physical sight to see with spirit, hope, and faith. Each episode will empower you to develop the courage and self-assurance to go after the life you want. Here is your host, Hasina.
Hey, hello, Danielle. I'm so excited to have you with me today
Thank you for having me, Hasina. I'm really excited to be here.
on our next episode of Change Your View. And it's so ironic. We met maybe about 5-6 months ago, if that long.
If that, yeah, it was pretty recent. Yeah.
And we hit it off right away because there was just that connection that we felt because we had kindred spirits of just taking that leap to become entrepreneurs.
Yes, yeah. I was grateful in the space I think we were in some small groups together and were able to have a lot of just kind of more intimate conversations. Yeah, and I definitely felt the energy right away. So yeah, I'm glad we were able to connect.
And your story is so powerful because you worked a 9 to 5.
I
And a lot
did.
of times people feel trapped that they have to stay where they are at a 9 to 5 instead of believing that they can take that leap to move forward in the direction that they feel driven
Mm-hmm.
to go. And I'm not saying to leave your job, and I want you to talk about that because I think that was what's so compelling. You said, I just decided that it was time for me to go, and you didn't even have a parachute, if I'm not mistaken. You just came home. And so tell me about that moment, because when you told me that, my jaw dropped myself because you didn't have a parachute. You just decided that this was not in alignment with my values and my beliefs, and I just cannot stay there any longer. So please expand on that.
Yeah. So that's funny that you said it that way. I didn't have a parachute. Yeah, I had a little something in place, but I didn't have a whole lot. So I've had 2 stints into consulting, having my own business. And so now I'm 5 years into the company that I have now. I run a company called Liberated Development that I started in 2019. But prior to this company, I think this is probably the time that I talked about when we met about the not having the parachute is I left a position some years prior, did not have a job in place, but yeah, that particular position and just the environment that I was in was very toxic to me, for me. There was definitely a values misalignment piece, which is what you mentioned. And in that moment, well, there were a couple of moments, but there was kind of one moment in particular that was kind of, what is it, the straw that broke the camel's back around. There was,
Yes.
so I guess I was the camel. This moment was the straw. And I was at an inflection point or a decision point or of being able to, or I had the ability to stay at this job. And to your point, and at that time I did feel trapped, right? This is what I am, this is the avenue or the channel through which my bills are being paid, right? Like life is real. I had a mortgage at the time, but the level of fulfillment that I was getting from the job and also some of the toxicity around just things that I was being asked to do that didn't align with who I wanted to be as a human, as a person in this world. I had to, at that point, make a choice of, do I stay here for the paycheck, right? And the paycheck is real. And sometimes, like we have to make decisions based on that.
Mhm.
But I was thankfully in a position where I could give it some thought. I had some contacts in place where I was like, okay, I can, pull this together and do something on the side, pull this together and do something on the side. But I absolutely left without a new 9 to 5 or a new, regular job, if you will. But yes, to I'm taking the long way there to say it was for me around the values. I wasn't living in my values. I don't feel like I was living to my full potential in that role. I also don't feel like it was aligned to my purpose. And it was also what I was experiencing was also affecting my wellness, my health, how I was feeling about myself, the level of stress that I was carrying around because I was unhappy there and I needed to do something about it. Right. And so for me, the doing something about it was to leave there, right? Like for other people that doing something about it may be something different depending on their life situation. But yeah, it was absolutely affecting my wellness in a way that I couldn't afford.
And that's what's so powerful. I mean, is that you took that chance, not really knowing. I mean, I'm sure you had a vision because, like you said, you have started a business that's called Liberated, which I love the title.
Mm-hmm.
Share that name again.
Yep, Liberated Development. Yep, I started it in 2019. Yeah.
Liberated Development. And I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to know how you came up with that name because I know there's something to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you took that chance in leaving a place, changing your view, which is, I think this is what this podcast is all about, is how you
Yeah.
change your view and not allowing your circumstances to control you. Instead, you control your circumstances.
Yeah.
And you don't allow, and I know that there's been some challenges and some
Mm-hmm.
obstacles
Mm-hmm.
that you've encountered along the way. And I'm sure you look back because we always do, and we say, now, did I really just leave that job to sit here and now look at this mess I've made of my life? Did you have that moment?
So I never had the look at the mess moment, but I have definitely had the moments of like, did I really just leave this benefits paying, 401 contributing? Absolutely, I've had those moments, right? Because
Okay,
the whole
see?
retirement fund, right, that comes from me. So yeah, let me back up and say, so there are two things that are present here. So I left two different roles. So the first role that I left that I just talked about, that I consulted for a few years, and then I actually went back to the traditional 9 to 5 setting. And I was there for a number of years. And then in 2019, I left again. And that is when I started the company. So this time around is my second time leaving and starting a business. The first time that I left the role and started consulting, at that point, I hadn't started a company yet. I was just consulting on the side here and there. And I did that for a few years.
Okay.
And then after kind of getting exhausted with that, because I wasn't ready to start a company, I went back to a regular 9 to 5. When I left the 9 to 5 the second time is when I started Liberated Development. So I'll get to the name for you and how I came up with that name. So I'll try to give you the short version of it, which is I am Miss Professional Development, whether it, and Miss Personal Development, meaning every self-help, personal development, professional development, book, workshop thing that there is, right? Like at some point in life, and I've always been like this, right? I've always been in pursuit of and in spaces where I was seeking development of myself in some way, whether it's my spiritual self, professional self, emotional self. And this was the case, right? Like in my work environments, when, I was working, I was always pursuing what is the next opportunity, right? Like the way to develop myself. As I began to experience more spaces where I was developing, I was also feeling constricted or restricted, right? Like a lot of development programs or spaces or whatever, you're not really liberal. And let me speak for me. I didn't experience a lot of places where I was encouraged to develop freely in whatever authentic, genuine way came from me. It was within somebody else's framework, right? Like you go to this program and you develop this way because here is my framework. You go to the other program, you develop within this framework,
You had to fit within their
yes,
system. So
absolutely. So liberated for me.
Right. You couldn't be Danielle.
Yes.
You had to be constrained.
I could be Danielle within these 7 bullet points,
you had to be
right?
constrained, right, within this box.
Yes, you got it. So for me, that name, and when I think about, and what my company does is all about, so we do talent development within organizations. So I doing leadership development, doing team development, right? But that name for me and the way that I operate the company is based on what has worked for me in my life of creating spaces where folks are in tune with what they value, how they want to align their values with how they live their lives, and then operating from that place, right? Like, so the starting point isn't somebody else's framework, somebody else's idea of success, somebody else's idea of what a regular job should look like, right? What a 9 to 5 should look like. The starting point is me, my values, what I want to get out of this experience or this team, if I'm working with a team, right? Like starting with that, and then developing based on that versus developing based on whatever this predetermined prescription is that has been given to us. So that's kind of how I came up with the name, is basically basing it on the kind of development that worked for me, and then what I then want to be able to translate to folks that I'm working with from a client perspective.
And that's amazing, because in the day and age that we live in, and I think about when COVID-19 hit, the world just totally stood still and stopped.
Yeah.
We were stuck at home. It was a shock when people said, well, you have to telework now.
Mm-hmm.
And you were like, huh? Well, what's that? Because that was like being given like a kid with candy in going to a store, right? Where they could just, for real, I can have anything I want in here.
Mm-hmm.
So like telework was like being rewarded. So now we have it where it's more acceptable. However, but it goes to being liberated. And when I say liberated, because you still have the guidelines that you have to follow, but you're not constrained on how you get it done. And that's what I think people need to understand, is that you need to be able to have some autonomy, because we're all unique and we're separate.
Yeah.
And when we stop honoring that and try to control, we put a ceiling on the productivity and how high we can go in life.
Yeah.
And you're breaking through that with liberated development, helping employees, employers, and businesses and teams understand, let's take those limits off.
Yeah.
And let's instead look at your uniqueness, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I also hear in what you just said, and what is very much so true, and how I try to operate and kind of see things, and even how I think about the kind of knowing when I wanted to and needed to move on. When I think about elements of the business, it is for me about options. And that's kind of what I heard, what I'm hearing, even in what you're saying, right? It is the options are opened up, right? So if we use the pandemic as the example here of, a lot of people hadn't experienced working from anywhere other than their office, right? Like, to use that example. So there weren't a lot of options of how to get work done, right? Like, it was, you go to this office, you sit at this desk, this is the option, this is how you get the work done. But we were forced into seeing more options, more pathways, right? And then, to your point, right, people now are able to kind of operate in their uniqueness in ways and get the job done in different ways. And so I think for me, even to, take it back to your question and the conversation about when I left and started the company, to take it back to, it was me seeing multiple options, right? Like, it took some time for me to see that there is another way for me to experience life, make a living, pay this mortgage that I need to pay, right? Like, but the things that led to what a consistent, responsible life that is contributing to society looks like, right? Like, I grew up, as many of us did, in a way, for a long time, like, the only option or the only pathway to that was to go get a job somewhere, right? Like, you go get someone else's job. And I don't say that to say that there is anything wrong with getting someone else's job. I wouldn't be where I am right now if I didn't have the jobs that I have, right? But what was different for me, or I think what opened up for me, is seeing, and some of it was being exposed to other things. I was exposed to a lot of people, particularly when I started the company. A lot of friends that I had at the time happened to be people who had started their own businesses. And so I began to see that as an option for myself in a way that my view prior to that was just a bit more limited, right? Like, because I had only seen a few other examples of that, where now my world had opened up because I, had friends who had done this thing, or, someone else that I knew someone who had done this thing. So I think for me, my view, kind of my aperture widened a little bit in what I was able to see. And that kind of helped me as well, kind of land there. And it is also, to take it to Liberated Development, what I hope to and try to do with my clients, to your point of, what are the options and the different ways for us to get to this impact point, right? Like, all of the companies that I'm working with, right? Like, just like all of us as individuals, we're trying to make a difference in whatever way we're trying to make a difference, whether you're selling a product or whether you, at home with your family, whatever it is, like, you're trying to make impact somewhere. And so how do we see multiple options to get there, to not just limit ourselves to the one way that, we may be used to seeing it? And again, that way may work and that way may be great for some people, but it may not fit me for a lot of different reasons. It may not fit the way my life looks. It may not fit me because of my identity background. It may not fit me because of how my brain processes things, right? And so how do I make room for the varied ways, the options, right, for me to get to whatever that impact point is or whatever it is that I'm trying to get to? Does that make sense?
Yes, but I want to go back to something that you said, because I think I want to expand on it. You said when I left that one job and I didn't have a parachute,
Mm.
I dabbed a little bit with consulting. Then I
Mm-hmm.
went back to work,
Mm-hmm.
a 9 to 5. What was a mechanism that caused you to go back to the 9 to 5, and then yeah, what caused you to go back?
That's a great question. What caused me to go back, which is going to be ironic since you talk about my company, was I didn't want to start a company. I didn't want to. So when I left the first time, I was consulting, so I was just consulting as Danielle, as myself, as Danielle Davis. And I had been doing that for a number of years. And I got to the point where it was like, okay, if you're going to do this, you need to make a business out of this, right? Like you don't want to just be doing stuff here or there, giving your social security number out when you doing your W-9s for the company, like I wanted to legitimize, I was at the point where I was doing it long enough where I needed to legitimize the work that I was doing. I'm going to predate myself a little bit, or I'm going to date myself a little bit. This time frame predates when you had to have a website in order to have a business.
Okay.
This was like this. So this was before you had to have the website, right? But it was during a time where like having the website would be nice, right? But like right now, if you had a business without a website, like people would ask questions or it might not be seen as legitimate.
Mhm.
Whereas this was during a time where I didn't have to have the website. But I also knew that to market myself as a business, to go to the next level and all of those things, I needed to be a business. So what made me go back to, the traditional 9 to 5 at the time is I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to, some of it had to do with just my own predisposition of how I am. I don't like to, self-promote. I don't like to market. I don't like to be in the spotlight. My personality is such that I always thought that I would not make a good entrepreneur or business owner because I'm not the person that likes to go work the room and, network and ask the people for the business. Now I can go in a room and work it, but I don't like to do it. So when I thought about, do I want to make this long-term and start a company? My internal answer, and that internal answer, I will say, a lot of was based in fear. But at the time, my fear of pushing myself in that way, the fear outweighed the confidence or the bravery at the time.
Mhm.
So because I had gotten to a place where it's like, okay, if you're going to keep doing this, you need to start a company. And my internal voice did all the things that sometimes these internal voices did and told me all of the reasons why I shouldn't and or couldn't. Then for me at the time, the safe path was to go back to a traditional job. And so that's what I did. And then in that traditional job, after some years and sometimes the other voice, there are often these two voices in our head, right? Like, and so that other voice was still nagging at me and pulling at me. And, there have been some years and some lessons learned, which I know you
Mhm.
spoke to as well. So those lessons learned and those years were then able to be put in the bucket when I actually did decide to start a company in 2019 because I had a little bit more confidence, bravery, and just years and experience behind me, right?
Mhm.
And I had a little more muscle to know how to shut those negative voices off a little bit more, right? And how to be strategic when, yes, you do need to network, but you don't know, it doesn't have to look the traditional way of networking, right? And again, that has to do with the options and the view. I think at that earlier stage, I saw networking or promoting a business as only looking one way, right? And there are a lot of ways to do that. And so just again, as my exposure and aperture kind of widened, I began to see that there are a lot of options to do this thing versus just the one way that I always thought, like, oh, to run a business, you got to be this kind of person and this kind of thing, and it's bigger than that.
So just so I understand, so you went back to the job, but then you did some more thinking and reflecting on it, and you said, I can do this. Sounds like that's what you said.
Yes, I did some more thinking and reflecting. I was still consulting every now and then while I was still doing that 9 to 5. So when I went back, I was still consulting a little bit. Yes, I did think about it some more and say, I can do this. And I began to meet more people who also were running their own businesses. And so I was also exposed to it in a different way that also built my confidence.
Mm. So it sounds like, what you said there too is that if you if you are questioning or in doubt about the path that you should go, things will be placed in your path that will help you see the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened to you listening to what you're telling me, because you went back, but then you were surrounded by people who were entrepreneurs
Mm-hmm.
who then gave you the confidence to say, I can do this. And then you went back out, because a lot of times it takes that support
Mm-hmm.
and those mechanisms that put it in alignment. And I'm a person of faith. So I say that it seems to me God was bringing people into your direction too,
Mm-hmm.
to help you see, Danielle, I didn't tell you to come back here. I know you said that that's not for you, but then he placed these people into your path that helped you to go in the direction that you really needed to go. So now you're in your company now. We'll fast forward.
Mm-hmm. Sure, sure.
And what did you see? What was the vision that you had? Because a lot of times you only see what you saw back then. Well, yeah, I'm stepping out, I'm going into my business. But what was the vision that you saw for Liberated Development?
The vision that I saw, honestly, was freedom.
Mm,
It was, you used a word earlier about people feeling trapped in roles or trapped in jobs or trapped in
confined
so
and confined
yes,
and constrained.
yes,
Yes.
confined, yes. So for me, when I started Liberated Development, what I saw, I mean, there was, of course, the vision and the mission and what I saw for the clients that I serve, right? And the people and the kind of work that I'm doing and the impact that I wanted to make in the world. So I definitely saw that, right, as far as it relates to the day-to-day of what the business does. But another driver, and I would say probably the top driver for me, was that I saw a more free life for myself. I was working pretty in a very unhealthy way. I was the job that I was in prior to this. I was, working a lot. It was a demanding role. And I was enjoying the work that I was doing, but I was working again at a pace that was unhealthy for me. And there was a lot of restriction or that I felt in that role. And I mean, I'm just going to make it simple. I didn't feel free. I didn't feel like a free human being, right? Like I felt like I was under the hand and the direction of someone else. And of course, when we're working for somebody's company, yeah, at a certain, in some ways you are under somebody else's. We can't all go to work and do whatever we want to do all the time, right? Like there are definitely some, confined,
There's parameters.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, that is absolutely there. But for me, and this kind of goes into values, I'm also a person of faith, and I'm also a person who is very intentional about living my values. And for me, something that I valued was freedom. And when I say my own freedom, I mean how I experience and live my life. And I didn't have that in a way that was meaningful for me in the previous role or roles that I was in. And so for me, that value of kind of contributing to the world in the way that I wanted to contribute to the world, feeling like I was able to live out my purpose in a way that felt meaningful for me, something that I didn't feel like I was doing in that previous role. Like I wanted to be free to do those things, right? So when I say freedom, I don't mean just to wake up at noon and do what I want to do, right? Like I mean it from a space of I feel very in tune with my values and my purpose, and being in an environment that felt like it was keeping me from doing that meant that I wasn't living as my fullest free self.
Yes.
And so for me, what I saw when I decided to leave and start the company was I saw a world where I could be free to do that, right? Like to impact this world in the way that felt meaningful for me and that I was purposed to. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
It does. I mean, the whole thing is that one, you've highlighted that your biggest value is freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that you wanted to use that value of freedom to help other companies and other individuals as well break free. I mean,
Absolutely.
so you're helping the companies with their employees see the power of allowing their personnel to be free, to be autonomous and separate,
Mm-hmm.
and it then feeds into their bottom line. Because until
Absolutely.
we understand that, we're not going to get the highest productivity out of the people who make our business work.
Absolutely. I mean, I say often, right, like that the investment point for companies who want to invest in their growth, that starts with investing in the growth or development of their people, because the people are the ones who are going to, drive their growth, the growth of the company. So absolutely, I'm affirming, what you're saying is that it starts with the human beings, right? Like that are actually driving the company. Otherwise it's just numbers and metrics, and the numbers and metrics are important, but there are people that are actually going to help the organizations meet those numbers and metrics. So yeah.
I know. And that's that's one of the things that I am so big about, which is why I started Ava's Pathway, which is transforming women's lives.
Yes, I
To
love it.
believe, become, and belong, one pathway at a time. But I want each woman to take control of their own pathway.
Yeah.
I don't want you to feel like you have to be constrained and fit into a peg where you are a circle instead of a square.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's not to say that you need to become an entrepreneur.
Sure.
But find a place where they value you. I'm sure the companies that you work for, they understand that and they get it. And that's why they bring you on as a consultant for their businesses, because they know that the people matter.
Mm-hmm.
People matter. And then that will give you, if you give them what they want, then they will in turn give you what you want.
Yeah. And if you give them room to, to go back to something that you said earlier too, but give them room to kind of be their best selves, right? To be able to show up in the way that is authentic to them, right? Like if I'm working on a team and I am able to actually bring my creativity, I'm actually being able to bring that to that team, I'm going to contribute to that team in a different way. I'm going to bring some new ideas, right? Because I have a little bit more room to be myself in a way that is positively contributing to that environment, versus if I'm on the team, but you're not investing in me, or I have to be a certain way. I'm not going to bring those new, fresh ideas because I don't feel like who I am, the fullness of who I am, and the ideas that I bring, I don't feel like those things are welcome here, right? Like, and so those generative ideas, those, those fresh, innovative ways to approach whatever problem that the company is trying to solve, they're not going to get that from the people if the people don't feel like they can bring that part of themselves to the space.
And what do you think are the light bulb moments that make a company finally understand this, to wake up and see that the people matter, and let's go back to investing in them and what they want first? What do you think is the light bulb moment for the clients that you have that come to your way?
A light bulb moment for them to kind of get it, like get that the people matter.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say a couple of things, but a lot of times I think some of when companies see it or get it has to do with when they are looking for new, fresh ideas, because whatever pattern that they've been in hasn't worked. So I've seen that light bulb sometimes come because they're in a pattern. It could be a holding pattern. It could be a pattern of the same thing, some stagnation happening, right? But something where maybe something that we are doing or a cycle that we're in is not working, and whatever turns the path the other way comes from somewhere unexpected. Sometimes that is a light bulb for them to see, like, oh, like where the freshness is coming from somewhere other than kind of the same old, or the way that we're, thinking about this before.
So they have to finally wake up and decide that they've been going around and around in circles with the same returns. But if they are willing to go down a different path, like we keep saying path, that they might get a different return.
I would. Yes. And that's like, to succinctly say it in that way. And I think too, I would say that there is I mean, I will probably date myself again by saying this, but I'm also going to say that I think that while there is now a lot of sticky conversation going on around the multi-generational piece of the workforce right now, that, we have 5 generations of folks working together. So we got these really, really young folks coming in, and we got folks who are my parents' age, still there. But I say that to say, I think there is also something that is kind of light bulbish with this newer generation of folks that are coming into the workforce, right? Like, I think there is a fresh perspective or a different perspective of what folks are looking for from their workplaces. And I think that being merged with what people have traditionally sought in workplaces something about that mix being there, right? That freshness, that new idea being there, I see sometimes resulting in a like, oh, okay, like I don't know if I'm totally with this yet, but there may be something here, right? But and I use that something or say that something is that I think it has something to do with the freshness that is a new perspective of what young folks are looking for from their work environments right now.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you raised that point, and that's something that I gave a seminar on that about the
Oh,
multi-generation
really?
this year. And the whole thing is about we need to understand how we can embrace each other differences
Mm-hmm.
and learn from each other differences
Mm-hmm.
and then come up with new solutions and
Yeah.
new options. First you start with the options, then solutions, but that helps us to think outside the box
Yeah.
instead of ridiculing each other, because I know for myself, I can learn from someone who's half my age. I'm
Mm-hmm.
open-minded
Same.
to that.
Yeah.
But when you get to have that closed mind, that's when you hinder yourself and you hinder what can actually occur. And I think about the fact that most importantly is that the values for our younger generation are totally different than the values of what me and you have today.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
there's no way in the world I could think about not having some, like, to go to a job interview. I would not think to go to a job interview with a pair of jeans on and maybe just a blouse, but that's just
Mm-hmm.
me. But
Yeah, yeah, I
I
get
probably would not wear a suit today like I used to before,
mm-hmm.
but I'm just saying, and I don't mean this in a negative way either.
I understand what you're
That
saying.
it's just
Yeah.
that our views are different. But
Mm-hmm.
then again, I put on my other hat. I have to be open-minded to understand that things have changed. So maybe a pair of jeans and a nice shirt is acceptable, and I need to
Mm-hmm.
break outside the box. So the point is
Mm-hmm.
that we need to understand that we can't remain rigid and
Yeah.
inflexible and say that it has to be this way because that's the way it's always been done. And we have to change that tune. Instead, say, let's see how this can be done.
Yeah.
Look at
Yeah.
it in a different perspective.
Yeah.
So
I love that. I mean, I love, your point from the interview, what it made me think about. You talked about being a woman of faith. I mean, I grew up in a church and I watched, this changed over the years of there was a time in the way that I grew up that I wouldn't have ever thought of going into church with some pants on, right? Like like
yeah,
because of the way, and now, you go to church and they're pants, but some of that has to do with denomination and things of that
right.
sort, right? But it ties to values and, and it makes me think about even the value, like again, to go back to the point of me even being able to name that a value for myself in my professional, a pursuit was freedom, right? Like to be able to say that, I think that is even different generationally from, I think about and
Mm.
during that, their value, I'm painting with a broad brush generationally, but the value for the workplace then, like my parents were looking for security, right? Like they weren't thinking about being free,
Mhm.
being free to create their own business. It's like, how do we get this job, stay in this job, build our retirement, all of the things. And again, I'm talking about a
No,
generation where
but
she
that's
wasn't removed from, it was a different value.
and that's the thing. So then it was based on security, but now it's based on values. And the
Yeah.
younger generation now is based on how are you aligning with what I want out of
Who
my
I
life?
am. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so we have to change that perspective as employers to
Yeah.
not be about, well, you should be worried about your security. When no, it's actually, well, what value am I bringing to help you become the person that you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's
Yeah.
what the focus is nowadays.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
until we get that right and stop thinking about what we want it to be, we
Mm-hmm.
will be stuck. And that's why you're brought in to help liberate those companies and
Yes,
say
you
to
are
understand
right.
that everybody is autonomous. And
Yeah.
let's see how we can come together.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but we can stay on this topic for a long time, I know.
Of
So
course. Yeah. Tangent.
let's move let's move on to this one because it's not roses, we know, getting out
Mm-hmm.
and being on your own. So how has the journey been for you in launching your business? I mean, like you said, you wasn't a person that was used to going out. I mean, you just said you could do it. Let me preface that. I said that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you wasn't a person that loved to go out
I
and
still don't love it.
so how did you bridge that gap and what has been your obstacles to actually getting your business off the ground and running?
Oh, that's a big. I'll try to stay on topic here and stay in line. So obstacles for me, I mean, one was getting over myself, right? And just vulnerably, starting a business, starting a company. I mean, you're putting yourself out there. When you put your vision out, your mission out, you create a thing, it is vulnerable in a way, right? Like all of the previous jobs that I had before starting Liberated Development, like if I'm going to speak on a panel, I'm going to present a thing, whatever I'm going to do, there's a certain safety net in that I'm hiding behind someone else's product, somebody else's idea, somebody else's vision, right? When I put myself out there, every time I say Liberated Development, it is me. I'm exposing me all of the time. So I say that to say the first thing for me was just getting over myself, right? Whether that's ego, whether it's, just kind of being open and willing to know that this purpose and mission that I'm seeking to put out in the world is bigger than me, and so I had to get over myself. So that was the first thing and the first obstacle. I say often that, if I could do my job from behind or under a rock, I would do it from there. I don't want to be in the forefront. I don't want to be, so I had to do a lot of getting over myself. I also had to ask for help, right? I can't do all the things, be all the things to all of the people, right? And so asking for help for both things that I don't understand, right? Like there are a lot of things about just running a business day to day, the operations, the managing the finances, the SOPs, there's a lot of things to running a business that I didn't know, or I didn't know that I didn't know. And so I think being able to ask for help was a tough thing for me to do at first. I have gotten better at it. I still don't know that I am winning on all fronts as it relates to that, but I'm much better at that than I was before. I would say, another obstacle is separating myself from this company. Because in a lot of ways, I am the brand, right? Like I built the company. I am, Liberated Development. And it is very easy to, if I feel like, client doesn't want to work with me, or this thing didn't go well, or whatever the thing is, right? Like being able to not make that an indictment on who Danielle the human is, right? Like it's easy for those things to just get mixed together because I have put so much of myself into the company.
And not taking it personal.
Yeah. So being able to still sustain my who I know that I am, and, not internalize those things in an unhealthy way. So that, I mean, and I don't know, that still is tricky for me, right? But yeah, I would say that's been a challenge. That's been a challenge. Yeah, for sure.
When our time has really flown here, we can talk.
Okay, fair enough.
I know. I mean, we could talk all day.
Yeah.
I know that you have so much to share, but what is one thing you want to leave our listeners with? Because I think your story is so powerful in the fact that you had the 9 to 5 and you went back, but then you understood that, wait a minute, my value is freedom. And then God did put things in your path to help you see that this is not where you're supposed to be. And you finally stepped out on that faith, believing in the concept that you could have your business, because you already believed in the fact that you could be free.
Yeah.
But the concept of your business that became a reality. What is one thing you want to leave people with to let them know that they can go their own path if they just believe in it?
I think the one thing that I would leave people with, I think I would say, whatever way, this starts with having a destination in mind, whatever that thing is you want to do, be, create, whatever way that you see that you can get there, think of 3 different other ways. Think of 3 other ways. I say that because if you have the end goal in mind and you have multiple pathways to get there, you are more likely to stay on course if that one thing or that one pathway doesn't work, right? This one road doesn't work. If we only have our eyes set on the one road, if the one road doesn't work, we might give up on the thing. But it's just, it's just like we're going to a destination. You may be going somewhere, one street is cut off. You still can take a detour and go to another street, right? Like you still can get to whatever that end destination is. So I think I would say, like, once you have that end goal in mind, or you want to create something different, is I actually taking the time to think about what are multiple ways to get to this get to this thing, get to this point, get to this goal, so that you're more encouraged to stay the course if just that one way falls by the wayside.
No, and I think that's powerful because you can get stuck if you only see one way to get to that destination. It's like when you're traveling on a road trip
Mm-hmm.
and there's a big pile up on that interstate. We don't sit on the interstate and wait till they clean it off and they clear up the pile up.
Yep.
We immediately go to the navigation system and
Mm-hmm.
say, reroute me,
Yes. Yes.
right? And so that's what we have to do in life. We have to reroute,
Yeah.
get to the destination that we ultimately want to arrive at.
Yeah.
But understand too, I leave with this note because
Mm-hmm.
let that destination not be your final destination.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
That's just another leg of the journey
Mm-hmm.
because you have to keep elevating yourself, going to higher levels in your life
Yeah.
so that you don't become stagnant
Yeah.
and think that this is it.
This is it. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. Very well said. Yeah, that we're always going somewhere. Always, always. We're never done. As long as we're on this earth, we're never done.
I love it. And I think
Yeah.
on that note, I like to end that because that is powerful. You have never done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Thank you for having me, Hasina. I appreciate it. I appreciate you so much and appreciate the work that you are doing. I appreciate it so much. Yeah.
no, we're doing work together. And I know
Yeah.
that there's going to be times where we will be able to collaborate our two businesses because I see that.
Yes. Yes. You speaking it. I'm claiming it. Yeah, I'm here for it. Yes, absolutely.
So Danielle Davis with Liberated Development, I thank you so much for this conversation today on Change.
Thank you. Thank you much.
This concludes this episode of Change Your View. Let this conversation help you navigate life's challenges, emerging from that seemingly endless pause that you are experiencing. Regain command of your own path and resist being boxed in. Visit hsjackson.com for more inspiring and eye-opening discussions. Stop walking in the shadows of other individuals. No longer allow inferior perspectives to brainwash you. Do not be forgotten. You have the authority and power over you. Make the most of your abilities. Thank you for listening. Until next time.